And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. We're live. Welcome to Benchley Night. Welcome to Benchley Night here on a slightly snowy, the last day of November 2025. Oh my goodness, 3 more years to go before we find out what happens next. Maybe 3 more years to go. I'm not feeling great about this, the world these days. And but maybe you are. Maybe you are. Tonight's reading is by Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling, who I've been reading from the last few weeks. This week, I'm taking a break from A Libertarian Walks into a Bear, because we'll return to that. But I wanted to read this one chapter about American healthcare and zombies, because I think it is absolutely relevant to what is going on in the world right now. Let's see who we've got out there. We got Jim Frisk, just back from his trip across Canada on Via Rail's train number 2, the Canadian. Great train, great train. Catherine Fisher. Hi, Catherine. Martha Rowley. Hi, everybody. Anyway, this is a pretty long reading. Just be prepared for that. I'll read it as best I can. If you need to go get a snack at some point, don't forget this is always available over on my YouTube channel. All right. Hi, Nikki Heenan. Hi, Jan Sheehy. Oh, it's nice that everybody's here. All right. This is chapter 7, and I will explain anything that references stuff that's gone before. I'll try to. American healthcare, a refuge for zombies. Even beyond consolidating radicalized Americans into a political bloc and lining the pockets of people promoting alternative treatments, the medical freedom movement has had an impact on the health of America. The anti-vax sentiment represented a deep self-wounding, as millions of Americans, mostly in the South and West, and mostly in rural counties that had voted for the former game show host in his presidential campaign, flouted social distancing, mask, and vaccine recommendations during the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to more cases and more deaths from the virus in those regions. When 2020 finally came to a close, the U.S. had suffered more coronavirus deaths per capita than any other country. That death toll was a byproduct of the massive, though largely invisible, transformation of how healthcare worked in America, and of the medical establishment's hemorrhaging of both patients and trust. Millions of individuals responded to perceived flaws in medical doctors by simply abandoning them. Nationally, fewer than 1 in 3 Republicans said they trusted medical scientists to act in the public's interest. Rates of people who lacked health insurance were higher in red states, topping 20% in the deep red South by 2018. A 2020 survey found that 105 million Americans, roughly a third of the country, had opted out of all professional medical care during the preceding 12 months. They weren't opting out of health care, mind you, just professional health care. They were defecting to forms of health care that had less regulation, less science, and less transparency. A 2017 Pew Research poll showed that 20% of Americans had rejected conventional medicine and exclusively used alternative medicine. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, which counted 400 online pharmacies in 1999 and 11,000 in 2005, estimated that there were now 35,000 active online pharmacies, of which roughly 33,250 were not in compliance with the law. By 2027, analysts predicted the global alternative medicine market would be worth $296.3 billion, a tenfold increase over 1998. At the same time, global spending on healthcare as a whole doubled between 1998 and 2020 to $8.5 trillion. It is expected to decline in further years as coronavirus-related spending is stepped down. By partnering with the medical freedom movement, alternative healers were not merely competing with the medical establishment, they were breaking it. The game show host elevated two members of the Congressional Dietary Supplement Caucus, Mick Mulvaney and Mike Pompeo, to White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of State, respectively. At the FDA, agents who had once shown up on the doorsteps of hucksters now found representatives of those hucksters in the corner offices of their headquarters. Now, I'll put in a note here, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, this is written about the first presidency of the game show host, not the current presidency. Keep that in mind. Political appointees fell on the agency like corrosive acid rain. The game show host's new cadre, which was cheered by the supplements industry, included FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn, medical freedom advocate David Gortler as senior advisor to the commissioner, and top spokesperson for the agency, Emily Miller, a recent talking head on the hard right supplement-infused media channel One America News, and author of Emily Gets Her Gun, but Obama Wants to Take Yours. Anti-vaxxer Andrew Wakefield had said the establishment was in for a shakeup. Under the new regime, it was not only shaken up, but shaken sideways, shaken violently, and shaken down, leaving its data-loving bureaucrats visibly shaken. For example, the game show host successfully pressured the CDC to revise COVID testing recommendations so that those who came in close contact with coronavirus patients no longer received a recommendation to be tested. At the same time, the science that underpinned the FDA's authority was being undermined, as in August 2020, when the FDA obtained the results of a study indicating that roughly 8% of hospitalized coronavirus patients who received blood plasma within 3 days died, versus roughly 11% who died after receiving blood plasma on day 4 or later. It was a pretty ho-hum finding, but the White House was eager to inflate any shred of good news. So FDA spokeswoman Miller and Commissioner Hahn completely misrepresented the study as a supposed major breakthrough, inaccurately saying that it showed blood plasma infusions would save the lives of 35 out of 100 hospitalized coronavirus patients. Meanwhile, the FDA Operations Manual, 567 pages of directives, were being referenced much less often because its enforcement wing was taking far fewer actions against one true cures. Now, I will say this book is about a bunch of people who have discovered what they believe is the one true cure for what ails humanity. So when he talks about one true cure, people, he's talking about quacks. The agency secured injunctions, its most powerful enforcement tool, against half as many criminal violators as it had during its Obama-era peak. Its hyper-capitalized warning letters were also decreased by half, thereby saving lots of money on uppercase W's and L's, while those targeting medical devices like fraudulently marketed lasers dropped even more steeply by 2/3. For FDA staffers, efforts to cling to science became perilous. After the agency rejected the use of oleandrin, the poisonous plant extract championed as a coronavirus treatment by the pillow salesman who holds a spot on the board of an oleandrin-selling company as a dietary supplement, the game show host attacked both the FDA and the National Institutes of Health as, quote-unquote, deep state. The overall picture was clear. The FDA was in tatters, and the one true cures had won. As the first days of January 2021 rolled by, much of the country, and certainly those in the medical establishment, breathed sighs of relief. The nation had resoundingly rejected the game show host's re-election bid, and people were eager to turn the page. But on January 6th, as Congress met to certify the election results, the game show host held a rally just outside the U.S. Capitol building. Thousands of supporters showed up. Some gathered around a health freedom stage to hear speakers like Denise Aguilar have an all-female militia group that taught members natural medicine and its seemingly distant cousin firearms use. On the main stage, immediately after the game show host's speech ended, the crowd marched on Congress, pushing back blockades and a small number of Capitol Police officers who got in their way. Over the course of the next few hours, as members of the crowd expressed vehement support of the president, who neither addressed the throng nor allowed for the deployment of the National Guard to control them, they grew increasingly, afterwards they strongly objected to being described as violent. So let's just say they grew increasingly animated. They also didn't like the mainstream media's characterization of the event as a riot, but even they wouldn't deny that it was a 5-alarm kerfuffle. As the crowd began to break down doors and windows in an effort to hunt down members of Congress, there were signs of the health freedom movement everywhere. A New Jersey anti-vaccine and medical freedom organizer named Stephanie Hazelton used her pink phone to record herself urging people into the building. Aguilar was in the crowd, as were Tennessean activists Ty and Charlene Bollinger, founders of a PAC called United for Medical Freedom. The Bollingers, who helped to organize rallies in advance of the animation, made tens of millions of dollars selling video series called The Truth About Cancer and The Truth About Vaccines for $500 each. The crowd began to flow into the federal building. Some wore animal pelts. Some wore bulletproof vests. Some wore both. There was face paint and campaign swag. Someone carried a spear. Inside, Simone Gold, head of the anti-vax group America's Frontline Doctors, gave an impromptu shouty speech to some of the kerfufflers, and at another time was part of a group that animatedly pushed and pulled Capitol Police officers out of the way. Gold, who had received roughly $150,000 in federally funded COVID relief grants, had organized a rally earlier that day for health freedom. Police officers defending the Capitol were repeatedly taunted and beaten. Someone used a tomahawk axe against them. Others used flagpoles, a fire extinguisher, and a wooden plank. Few people had ever seen such an animated kerfuffle. As the crowd broke through the glass of a locked hallway door inside the Capitol building, police shot and killed a libertarian activist named Ashley Babbitt. 3 other kerfufflers died in the commotion. About 150 Capitol Police officers were injured. One officer died from a series of strokes that were induced by the injuries and trauma of the day, and several others committed suicide in the following days and weeks. Many felt that America had hit rock bottom. The medical freedom movement, which had a great deal of practice disagreeing with people, disagreed. Mainstream America had a blind spot. It tended to allocate attention to an idea in direct proportion to that idea's relevance to reality. This meant that when people heard about something ridiculous, a secessionist drive in Texas, a game show host seeking the presidency, a plan to derail a legitimate election by storming the Capitol. They either discounted it or discussed it as an entertaining trifle. Every time public officials sank to a new low by embracing an undemocratic, preposterous, or even dangerous idea, mainstream America thought the country had this time hit bottom. It was unable to see this next ridiculous idea, the next potential low, as a serious possibility. One cannot see through the looking glass. One can only go through it. As I researched this book, I found the actual bottom. It is becoming a reality, and it is so ludicrous that it has to date been utterly dismissed. A prime example of this blind spot came when a team of academic researchers documented the pandemic's effect on dream imagery. Documenting the pandemic's effect on dream imagery, found that zombies were turning up much more frequently, which they understood to represent the threat of the pandemic. I'll put forth an alternative theory. The zombies represented zombies. Hamilton Newman. Are you all still with me, ladies and gentlemen? You all still with me? Let's see. Mary Narsowitz. Hi, Sharbo. Yes, says Milo. No, Carol, we are not there yet. You'll see. You'll see. I hope you're all enjoying this because it gets intense. Hamilton Newman, the youngest son of Dale and Leonie Newman, one of the very religious characters earlier in the book, maintained his passion for filmmaking and cameras into adulthood. There's also a cat rolling around on my computer keyboard right now, so if I disappear, that's what's happening. In August 2015, at the age of 20, he landed a gig as a cameraman for one of the best-known televangelists of the 1980s, Jim Bakker, whose PTL Club was once the largest religious-themed TV show in America. Tall and lean, Hamilton would eventually become Bakker's director of video productions, and he sometimes traveled with members of Bakker's family to film segments for the show. Bakker's ratings were not what they had been in his heyday, but he was doing well enough. The show earned money by selling a variety of branded and affiliated products, including the Silver Solution, Bakker's one true cure for COVID-19, to his followers, many of whom were actively preparing for the end of days. Bakker also regularly hawked an array of survival products, including large buckets of cheesy broccoli rice and creamy potato soup, which could cost up to $4,500. In April of 2021, soon after sitting down to film another episode, Bakker introduced his guest, a radio host named Steve Quayle, who sold a handheld device that detected EMF, electromagnetic field, frequencies in food for just $279. Quayle had black friends, and he had Mexican friends. I know this because after mentioning Hillary Clinton, he interrupted himself to say, I have black friends, I have Mexican friends. But Quayle was not there to discuss the finer points of black and Mexican friend making. He had an important message for Bakker's apocalypse-indulgent audience. Quayle told Bakker that COVID variants were in fact biological weapons designed to depopulate the earth, and that nasal swab COVID tests were efforts to collect en masse genetic material. And now they want to take our South End swabs, he added, referring to people's butts in politer terms than he'd used to refer to genocide. Quayle moved on, getting all the way down to the brass tacks, embedded within the set's cushionily upholstered chairs. He referenced a new COVID variant emerging in Brazil, which he said was a prophetic signal. Why? because Brazil is also a known habitat of zombies. A zombie is literally, quote, a zombie is literally a life form that has, how should I say this, animation. But if you've seen them, they're not all there. They may have missing parts. They may have a taste for human flesh. The zombies, he said, were coming up from under the earth to invade the dimensional reality of the world, creating a supernatural battle for our very existence. Quayle, a longtime believer in zombies, had become a sort of hub for news of the undead. And lately, he said, his email inbox was blowing up with first-hand accounts of zombie encounters, some of them from people in the military and law enforcement. I have a friend that was in Iraq who sent me the account actually coming into an entire camp of zombies. He said, Steve, they were dragging one leg like in a movie. One of them had only half a body. Quayle added that he was not trying to freak people out. And in the spirit of not freaking people out, he also added that certain diseases can initiate cannibalism in human beings. Jim Baker broke in. I know my audience members are having a hard time with zombies, he said, trying to keep the discussion in a world that was, well, maybe sensible isn't the right word, but in that narrow range of insensibility in which people might shell out $4,500 for buckets of soup. Baker gave Quayle a chance to step it back just a bit. Do you believe in zombies? He said. Oh, absolutely, said Quayle. Baker seemed a bit taken aback. This was perhaps a matter of semantics. He suggested that maybe Quayle was calling a real-life transmissible disease by the inflammatory name of zombieism. Is that right, Steve? Zombies that are on the earth are a disease, like any other disease that affects people, and they become like zombies, Baker said. Is that right? Forgive me, Quayle said, but that's only part of the story. Quayle explained that vaccines could indeed induce zombieism, just like a disease. But zombies were also possessed by demonic entities imbued with the sole purpose of destroying humanity. And because the vaccine-induced disease rewrote the victim's DNA, the zombies were literally inhuman beasts. The whole subject of zombies could be just boiled down at one end to a genetically modified human that is no longer a human on the level that you and I, or a living being, is, said Quayle. He offered some rock-solid evidence to back up his assertions. If this is all wild stuff, he said, why does the military have a manual about it when it happens? Why does the CDC? There's an earlier section in the book where Hongoltz-Hetling talks about the CDC in the 1990s as a lighthearted explanation of how to prepare for unexpected events, used a zombie apocalypse as the supposed event, but it was not literally saying that there was going to be a zombie apocalypse. Quayle believes that the presence of walking dead is proof of the resurrection, which denotes biblical end times. In Quayle's version of world history, zombies overran the original inhabitants of Easter Island. They annihilated indigenous Americans and the lost colony of Roanoke. Thousands of zombified supporters of the Confederacy were put down by victorious Union soldiers during the Civil War. In 1935, infected rats spread zombieism through a population of hurricane survivors on an island in the Florida Keys. Quayle is not the only person who believes in zombies. America was suddenly, somehow, full of them. Believers in zombies vary in their specific viewpoints. but they return to the same cultural touchstones, the Miami attack. Ali Khan's zombie apocalypse instructions on the CDC website. That's the one I referenced earlier. Ali Khan is the guy who wrote the lighthearted How to Prepare for an Emergency Using a Zombie Attack as the ostensible premise. A shadowy conspiracy behind it all. David Ells of Unleavened Bread Ministries, who joined with the Newmans in treating their dying, totally treatable 11-year-old daughter with prayer, told his ministry that, quote, a demon possession of people who actually devour others has come to pass. It was, per the CDC zombie training plan, an act of the deep state government. The government, Ells told his followers in one online missive, has been joking about this zombie apocalypse for some time in accordance with the powers that be's habit of telling us beforehand what they're planning to do. Remember, he said in another, those who partook of that bath salts began to physically devour one another. A preacher named Lance Wallnau warned that the media was using mind control and witchcraft to whip up the left against the game show host. Many of them are so zombified that they're taken captive by a spirit, he said. A woman named Jillian Epperly, whose one true cure, Jilly Juice, is a drink of fermented cabbage and salt that she says can regenerate lost limbs, eliminate cancer, and cure homosexuality, told her viewers that zombies were an extreme example of a body compromised by poor nutrition and susceptible to violent glitching when exposed to triggers like electromagnetic frequencies. A 2019 poll showed that 14% of Americans had an active plan in mind should the zombie apocalypse happen. Among those with a plan, 26% intended to get their hands on guns, 6% planned to actively kill zombies or survivors, and 12%, even more disturbingly, refused to say what their plans were. Followers of Quayle and Baker might have rejected the notion of zombies had they not already been primed to accept conspiracy theories about a global ring of Satan-worshipping pedophiles. The idea was established by QAnon, a grassroots community built around conspiracy theories that were released by a public official who used the pseudonym Q. The impact of the idea became national news in late 2016 when North Carolinian Edgar Madison Welsh fired an assault rifle inside a DC pizza restaurant that he believed was a front for a Democratic-controlled child sex trafficking ring. When the criminal case against him was adjudicated, District Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson sentenced Welch to 4 years in prison, but the false ideas that had inspired him continued to grow. In 2019, an anonymously authored QAnon book claiming that Democrats eat children became an Amazon bestseller, peaking in a group of the 75 most popular books in the country. The poll revealed that a majority of Republicans thought that the deep state pedophile ring story was either mostly true, 33%, or true in some parts, 23%, while another found that half the people who supported the game show host's re-election campaign believed he was fighting against a child sex trafficking ring run by Democrats. In 2022, 5 years after Jackson sentenced Welch for storming the pizzeria, she was nominated to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. During her confirmation hearings, her incarceration of a QAnon believer boomeranged back on her in the form of QAnon-based criticism from top-level Republicans that held or pandered to those beliefs. Senators Josh Hawley and Lindsey Graham accused Jackson of being unreasonably lenient on crimes related to child pornography, false accusations that quickly echoed through far-right QAnon-friendly media channels. And so it was only natural that when Baker and Quayle were chatting, they reminded their audience that the very crazy idea of zombies roaming the earth was just an extension of other crazy ideas that audience members already believed. "What about those left-wing dinner parties?" Baker asked Quayle, referencing a conspiracy theory that the Clintons eat babies. "They eat crazy things. I don't even like to talk about it because it's so weird." "It's an absolute occult ritual," Quayle agreed. "Spirit cooking means you're providing the sustenance for evil spirits." "The lady," said Baker, "the famous one, I won't even say her name. You see the bloody ghost head. Even a famous politico had a picture in his house of two men sitting over a cadaver, eating it." "I'll be blunt," said Quayle, who had apparently not been blunt yet. "Hollywood," Quayle said, "was in on it. Two of the most famous wealthy pop singers have said they are serving Satan and have talked about the taste of human flesh," he said. "The medical freedom movement starts with a perfectly reasonable desire not to have Big Brother breathing down your neck, takes a hard right when it is monetized in the poorly regulated internet marketplace, and ends with fears that zombies will overrun your bomb shelter. It is bizarre, it is wacky, it is almost laughable, but it is not laughable. Here's why. The Americans who believe in zombies don't think they're equally spread throughout the population. They believe that zombies are Democrats, or liberals, or liberal Democrats, or that the shadow cartel of elite puppet masters behind the Democrats. And once you've convinced yourself that those with opposing political views are literally undead monsters, it can be difficult to sit down with them for Thanksgiving dinner. Zombie credence showed that even an absurdity like the QAnon Satanist narrative was not the bottom. It was just another gateway down a slippery slope that ended in a deep, shit-steeped rabbit hole with a dehumanizing narrative as powerful as those deployed in Nazi Germany against the so-called inferior races. Democrats were zombies. The show wrapped. It was another great episode, the kind that would be sure to sell a lot of soup. Quayle's appearance on The Baker Show was just one example of how the idea that Democrats were literally flesh-eating zombies was sweeping through segments of the American public. On the website InfoWars, where for $562.30, one can buy 600 pills containing DNA Force Plus, Alex Jones told his large audience that liberals, quote, "want to get you in a dungeon. They want to strap you down and take a buzzsaw and cut the top of your head off like a pumpkin and pull it off and get a little spoon and go, 'I'm going to eat your brain now.'" Conspiracy theory Sherry Schreiner's bread and butter was the sale of pricey orgone blasters containing the imaginary substance orgone, which protected one from the shape-shifting alien reptiles that were replacing humans. Though Schreiner supported the game show host and the game show host admired Katy Perry, Schreiner's followers had identified Perry as a secret reptilian, along with Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift. Schreiner announced that her orgone products would also protect her followers from government-created zombies, which were totally real. The video game COVID Survived the Plandemic invited players to shoot people who have been turned into flesh-eating zombies by vaccinations. Another video game in which players shoot demon-crap zombies was in development, but was put on hold when its designer, Jack Jesse Griffith, was arrested for participating in the Capitol kerfuffle. The point of the game, Griffith posted on Facebook, was to, quote unquote, raise awareness. To me, the idea of dead-eyed mobs with not quite human gaits had been most memorably brought to life by the motion capture special effects of the detestably saccharine holiday movie, The Polar Express. But the sinister tone of the zombie propaganda I heard showed that I was very much behind the times. Conservative radio host Tom Horn, whose book of conspiracy theories was available at Walmart for $15.77, told his audience to actively prepare for the coming apocalypse, but to hide their beliefs and preparations from their own adult children and other non-believers within the family. Assume you'll be betrayed. Keep your survival and prep plans private. I know that sounds harsh to some people, but you cannot entrust people who think you are crazy, Horn said. There's some people listening that need to hear this. You cannot entrust to people who think, oh, mom's a little off, dad's wacky. You can't trust them at that point. It applies to spouses, too. Scott Lively, president of Abiding Truth Ministries, an anti-LGBTQ group, and a failed two-time candidate for governor of Massachusetts, held an online Bible study in which he said violence would likely be needed to stop the emerging beast government. If at all possible, you disarm the zombies trying to kill you without hurting them, said Lively. But if it's not possible, you do whatever is necessary to stop them. That, I believe, is the duty of an American. With this sort of zombie buzz happening at the street level, savvy political operatives began slipping zombie references into their rhetoric. If you didn't believe in zombies, it sounded like a mere metaphorical insult. If you did believe in zombies, it was a rallying cry against the literal undead. In 2020, Joe Ray Perkins, the GOP Senate nominee in Oregon, said mask mandates and social distancing guidelines were part of a plot to turn the public into zombies. She knew this, quote, based on what I have read on some of the Marxist theories, end quotes. 5 days later, after she lost, she announced that she'd be running again. And in 2022, she once again secured her party's nomination. The re-election campaign of the game show host aired an ad in 2020 in which viewers were told to prevent a zombie from entering the White House. Look for someone with a corpse-like appearance, exhibits aggressive behavior, craves human flesh, and utters incoherent moans and groans, the voiceover noted, while distorted footage of Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden doing all of the above played in the background. With your help, we can prevent the zombie uprising, the short ad concluded. One of the most unsettling scenes in Romero's canon of genre-defining zombie movies comes late in his 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, after the humans have nearly eradicated the zombie threat. As they mop up the few remaining undead, vigilante yahoos whoop and holler, knocking the helpless zombies down and torturing them. It was disturbing because it focused not on the capacity of zombies to eat brains, but on the capacity of Americans to lose theirs. Mainstream media outlets and Democratic political leaders responded to the zombie narrative in their way. A USA Today fact check wearily responded to a viral video that amassed 10,000 interactions on Facebook. Vaccination will not turn vaccine recipients into zombies. The CDC website on zombie preparedness was created in 2011 as a vehicle for spreading information on emergency preparedness. When film provocateur Sacha Baron Cohen caught two men on video telling his Borat character that the Clintons tortured children, removed their adrenal glands, and drank their blood, Hillary Clinton called the idea hurtful. In July 2021, during a CNN town hall, President Biden pleaded for reason. The idea, Biden said, that the Democrats or that Biden is hiding people and sucking the blood of children I'm serious. Now, you may not like me, and that's your right. But the kind of things that are being said of late, do you ever remember a time like this before in our entire history, whether Democrat or Republican? Fact checks, expressions of hurt, denials, calls for reason. Establishment politicians were bringing a brilliantly annotated and painstakingly highlighted copy of Robert's Rules of Order to a gunfight. When Quayle was selling the idea of demonic flesh-eating zombies to Jim Baker, he relied mostly on a spiritual explanation. But he did have a scientific one as well, tied to vaccines. It's important that people understand the digital insertion of nanobot technology, he said. The digital insertion of nanobot technology. To the mainstream scientific community, it sounds pretty thin, but in fact, the scientific evidence behind the notion came from an authoritative source, someone who many people felt was among the best research scientists in the world, an ITNJ commissioner, an Eagle Scout, a certified avocado grower. This is one of the One True Cure people that we have followed during the course of the book. In the past, in 2015, Robert Young, that's the certified avocado grower, had referred to zombies in a metaphorical sense, writing, acidic religions, governments, politics, businesses, lifestyles, and diets have turned the majority of Earthlings into zombies. But in 2020, his teachings evoked zombies in the context of the coronavirus. Young's theory of the vaccine was simple. The shots supposedly contained a nefarious brew of ingredients, including, quote, fragmented genetic matter from a 14-year-old male aborted fetus, various acidic substances, luciferous dye, and aluminum oxide. The medical nanoparticles in the vaccine could be activated by an electromagnetic network of the sort used in cell phone towers to assert total control over people's bodies, thereby turning them into mind-controlled slaves. This did not really square with the biblical notion of zombies put forth by Quayle, but that's the beauty of One True Cure worldviews. Squaring is a mathematical function, and the medical freedom crowd abandoned the numbers junkies long ago. After raising the issue in a blog, Young explained the science of the vaccine zombie connection on a show hosted by Dr. Charlie Ward, not a doctor, and he sells $30 holographic discs that purport to protect against 5G cellular networks. Ward, in turn, explained to Young that the COVID crisis was perhaps a smokescreen to clear the way for a reset of the world's financial structures to the quote-unquote quantum financial system, which is being installed by benevolent extraterrestrials to foil the evil cabal that rules us all. Young's message blew up. He received wide coverage in various disreputable media outlets and talk shows, including that of Stu Peters, a bounty hunter with a freedom-themed radio broadcast. Young told anti-vaxxer Del Bigtree, who was one of the ones who spoke to the crowd on the January 6th kerfuffle, that the graphene oxide in the COVID vaccine allowed a supercomputer to mind control people. That's why they need boosters, Young said, in order to make that human a transhuman. Before its news, a junk news website, sometimes cited by the game show host during rallies, quickly picked up on Young's rhetoric and was soon awash in articles explaining that, quote, COVID depop shot will turn you into a zombie without a spirit or soul. See interview, and that those zombies would be used in a coming genocide. The site celebrated Young as the expert who proved that vaccines contain nanobot technology, absolutely bombshell and major reveals on what is in the vaccines with use of electron and other kinds of microscopic microscopy from original research by Dr. Robert Young and his team. Dr. Young bombshell, major reveals, microscopy, original research. It was the sort of adulatory validation that Young had pursued for so much of his quote-unquote scientific career. The fact that it came in relation not to pleomorphism, that was his thing, pleomorphism, but to zombieism, did not seem to faze him at all. By 2021, a national survey of American fears found that 9.3% of adults, about 31 million people, actively feared zombies. Predictably, those fears led some fringe leaders to call for action against zombies. Also predictably, those calls for action resulted in a select group of mostly mentally ill people taking action against zombies. In East Liverpool, Ohio, a member of ZORT, the Just for Fun zombie outbreak response team, whose members decked out their vehicles in anti-zombie swag, was arrested by police and tagged as, quote-unquote, an apocalyptic hunter, after someone reported that he'd been searching through an abandoned florist building with a very large knife in his hand. A search of the vehicle, which had a fake skull mounted on the hood, yielded, quote, a loaded handgun with multiple loaded magazines of ammunition, a plethora of knives, multiple crossbows, and arrows. In August 2021 alone, a variety of headlines showed just how deeply a belief in zombies was warping reality. The New York Times described a woman working at an eyewear store who said she would not get vaccinated because the movie I Am Legend featured people who were turned into zombies by a vaccination campaign. Incidentally, although the fictional I Am Legend does feature zombies, the culprit is a lab-engineered virus and has nothing to do with vaccines. A woman named Lori Vallow was found to be incompetent to stand trial in a case involving the murder of her children. Was found to be incompetent to stand trial in a case involving the murder of her children, Tylee Ryan, 17, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, 7. Vallow and her new husband, a fringe Pentecostal leader named Chad Daybell, were part of a small doomsday cult headed by Daybell, who was also involved in various Armageddon-centric religious circles. Vallow and Daybell were convinced that Vallow's children were zombies, possessed by dark spirits, and could be released only by death. Police were investigating a string of other suspicious deaths in the family. A Santa Barbara high school teacher named Matthew Coleman loaded his 2-year-old son and 10-month-old daughter into the family car and drove them to Rosarito, Mexico, where he shot each child in the chest with a spearfishing gun. He told the FBI that he had learned through QAnon that his wife had passed some of her inhuman DNA onto the kids, and that killing them would save the world from monsters. Foiling an imaginary cult of democratic, zombie, child-eating, pedophile serpents by shooting a real child in the chest with a spearfishing gun. Scale that up. That's the bottom. All right. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found this worthwhile. Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling will be at the Rockingham Free Public Library on Friday, December 12th. We'll mostly be talking about libertarians and bears, though. We won't be talking about zombies. Until then, we'll see you next week for another chapter of A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear. You take good care. Don't let the zombies or the QAnons get you. You too, Sharps, not you. All right. Take care, everybody. Oh, Charbonneau has rearranged where my mouse was. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.